First impression on every single range DPS pick in Season 2 patch 12.1. Hey guys, Petko here. Welcome to episode 2 or part 2 of how every single spec currently is playing on PTR. If you haven't seen the melee version, check out the previous video. It's going to answer a lot of questions. Today, we're talking one of my favorite specs, including in that video, which you're going to see in a bit. I'm quite excited to play range next season, specifically when it comes down to dungeon design. And you're going to see powers slash class design in a bit. That's it. Enjoy the video, and as always, make sure to follow and like it. Alright, let's begin with one of my least favorite specs to play so far, Balanced Druid. Now, Balanced Druid tier set, first of all, has been a little bit disappointing. There's been no rotational changes in it. It's mostly been passive damage, and that's about it. Now, there are a lot of specs that have passive damage, which is not an issue, but here's where I have a problem with Balanced Druid. First of all, they stated, or when I say they, I mean Blizzard stated that high astrogen is a massive problem to Balanced Druid, so they want to make sure to never happen again, and that's why they nerfed a shit ton of abilities to generate astro power, which means you are likely to get less spenders. They also nerfed Touch of Cosmos, which should technically smooth down the rotation. But overall, you can expect the same exact rotation with no particular changes. It's just less spenders and a little bit slower. Now here's also one thing that I don't like. The build that everybody used to play, Elun's Chosen, which if you guys didn't know, you play single clips, you used to start fire on single target, no route builds, etc. That build has been nerfed. So now you do less power damage with it and less ST with it, which is not ideal. Where again, all of these changes might lead us to play Keeper of the Groove. Now I've tried several builds with Keeper of the Groove. All of them play similar, and I never liked it to begin with, so I don't know if I'll even try to go out of my way and maintain my balance with old. So far, I'd expect more changes to come for balance, for sure, but not a good first impression when it comes down to patch 12.1. Specifically talking here with the Lunar Calling, which again, you might have to be, even if you play Elun's Chosen, you still might have to cast Rat on ST instead of Starfire. Alright, so fan favorite spec, Devourer DH. If you guys have noticed, that spec has been meta for the past 4 months on Season 1, and every single human in this existence have been playing this as an ult, because first of all, does insanely good damage, very mobile, and your measure cooldowns are pretty, short. So here's what's changing for Devourer. The first and foremost, your tier set now is going to be focusing on Reap entirely. So previously, a Reap Eradicate used to account for decent chunk of your overall damage. Next season is going to become a large chunk or large portion of your damage. I think it has one of the most interesting tier sets because it might change the whole perspective of the spec and might force you to a complete left side instead of collapsing starter builds. That's only time is gonna let us know. Second massive thing that I've done to the spec is actually a significant nerf to mastery and a significant nerf to meta scaling, which means during major cooldowns, you are most definitely going to do less damage than before. So the goal in this season is to make sure to shift away your cooldown based damage towards more spread evenly outside of meta damage. Like if you have noticed previously, outside of meta, you did pretty poor, especially the consume part, void ray, even the eradicate part, it just wasn't hitting as much. So now that will change next season, which is going to help a lot of players that had a poor city management, right? So nerfing the mastery value can also open the door for other secondary stats to erupt. For example, critical strike. You might still play mastery crit, but not as heavy master as before, or even go on and play haste. I'm not sure about the specific stat distribution, but most definitely I can guarantee you could have a weaker meta, you can have more sustained damage, and you might switch around your secondary stats, or even switch the builds to Void Scar. I mean, it is possible. I think Annihilator was playing for 5 months even since the PTR. So now I've seen several Void Scar builds erupting on PTR. None of them were impressive numerically, but at this stage of PTR, we don't care about numerical value. What we do care is about design and how smooth the spec plays out. Alright, let's talk about BM Hunter. I think BM Hunter has a very nice approach to the tier set this time around, likely one of the best tier sets for raiding in my opinion. Specifically talking about the 4-piece here, focusing heavily on Cobra Shot, which has a lot of, in my opinion, interesting ways to use it in Mythic Plus. What you can expect from BM Hunter is pretty much the same consistent damage every 30 seconds measure cooldowns in terms of Beast Rat. A lot more damage focused on your pet, The builds that I've tried and tested so far has been no Dire Beast builds. I think for the most part you're gonna find now that BM Hunter plays exactly the same, except for the part where Wild Trash now is... I think as soon as you cast Wild Trash, Beast Cleave is like 10-second duration, and Wild Trash in general is like 8 seconds cooldown, which pretty much means it has become even easier. You can't really miss on Beast Cleave unless you are really blind or like severely trying to play worse, right? For the most part, you're gonna feel this way. I think overall, I've really enjoyed the playstyle so far. If you have to spread battle shots, yeah, I can't say much more about the BM Hunter. One of the most anticipated tier sets, at least from my experience when it comes down to waiting for the patch to drop. Most of the tier sets are boring. BM Hunter one, at least, is interesting. All right, so even though I said a lot of good things about Hunters, both Survival and BM, well, if you have watched the previous video, you know about Survival. BM Hunter is likely the most negative spec that I have reviewed so far. The first impression is terrible. They are terrible. Like, the spec plays like an absolute ass. Very slow play style. It takes, well, it used to take 2 business days to cast aim shot. Now it takes 3. It's so boring, you can fall asleep. The new reworked explosive shot actually is... I like the idea behind the rework on explosive shot, but still, the flat damage profile from the spec, even though the whole idea was to reduce the amount of damage you do during cooldowns, during true shot, and to evenly more distribute that throughout, you know, several seconds into the fight, or in general into the pack. I think it didn't work out well. If they overtune explosive shot, maybe it's gonna do damage, but overall it plays really bad. Even if this spec does a lot of damage, which right now it doesn't, it plays boring, slow, bad. Outside of cooldowns, it's also kind of a with noodle, which is not what you want to have as a spec. Overall, MM Hunter so far is likely one of the worst specs that I had a pleasure, leaving a first opinion on. All right, let's talk about mages. Now, mage in general have seen likely the most changes across all range specs so far on PTR, and the most distinguishable change on behalf of all the mages has been the fact that they buffed the durability quite a bit. So you are going to become tankier next season, that is for sure, and I believe the tankiest spec so far is going to be Arcane. However, let's talk about every single mage individually and what exactly has happened to them. First, let's begin with Fire Mage. Likely one of the, I think the most disappointing mage so far has been Fire. The tier set itself, no strong opinions. I wouldn't say it's bad or good. It's just pretty much forces you to play Pyroclasm. If anything, if you don't like Pyroclasm playstyle, then you might not like Fire. But overall, I wouldn't say it's amazing tier set, but it's not bad either. So they nerfed your damage during combustion. Well, I guess they did change the Apex Talents, which definitely nerfs your damage during combustion. And they try to give you more flat out damage outside of it, which I think is not a bad approach, because at the end of the day, everybody knows during combust, yes, you do good damage, but outside of it, you are pretty much hitting for nothing, right? So they did try to compensate that, nerfing, damage during combustion, increasing overall performance outside of it. I don't think it worked out for them specifically. I don't think so. I think the Fire Mage has always been known to have an insane explosive damage and sustain to be worse. They tried to take different approach so far. It didn't work out. Maybe with more changes in the future, it might. So far, rotationally speaking, mostly the same, in my opinion. Nothing significant has been changed for Fire for me to be like, wow, let me go play it, So I don't like it. All right, so when it comes down to Frost Mage, I actually quite like the tier set. One of the tier sets that I'm actually excited to, or have been excited to try out. What it is pretty much the 4-piece. Every time you consume Glacial Spike, it has a small chance to grant you another Glacial Spike, right? So see the RNG loop you can create back to back in case you get lucky. I actually quite like that on Frost Mage. So far, one of the most fun tier sets. When it comes down to Frost Mage in terms of like what has changed so far, not many things, honestly. Not many things have changed Frost Mage. The only major thing I could say is your they did nerf your Apex Talents, which would translate to you doing less damage during burst and not really compensated for that when it comes down to sustain. But all of these changes might actually make you, instead of being Slinger, might make you a Frostfire Mage right now. But again, we'll see very early on, but one of the few specs that haven't really seen a whole lot of changes when it comes down to, you know, talent revamps, stuff like that. The only major change here has been a defensive buff, but that's about it. And last but not least, let's talk about Arcane Mage. Arcane likely got one of the most changes across every single spec in the game so far, including melees and ranges. The 4-piece of the Arcane Mage is actually very good. I have been quite a fan of it. I think the playstyle of Arcane Mage has, in my opinion, improved drastically, although there's a lot of similarities when it comes down to the rotation. Some of the big takes here from Arcane or TLDR is obviously the second barrier, the defensive buff, all of this is gonna help you out. But here's what I think a lot of people might get it wrong. The Arcane Pulse rework, although has a cooldown now, previously it did not have, it still has a weird spot in your rotation. Now there are builds where you play it, there are builds where you don't play it, but for the most part I still find this button to be an extremely weird one. I don't know exactly what the goal is here, whether you want them to get, whether they want to buff that by significant margin so you can be forced to play it in Mythic Plus. I think it's just a little bit goofy right now. Majority of the changes here are likely pointing towards playing Sun Fury, but then again, it's very early on to say whether it's good or bad. You know, I don't care about performance right now, but looking at how things are, most players, especially the high-rated good mage players, Chinese, European, and Americans, they are playing Sun Furies. So that's so far on PTR, and all of the mages are converting to Arcane. I've seen a Frost Mage here and there, one Fire Mage only, and he swapped back. So I'd say for the most part, Arcane is eating well, especially so early into the PTR. Again, there's I think 5.5 weeks more of testing. Things might change. So far, Arcane gets a thumbs up from me. Alright, it's time to talk about Evoker. Now, before I continue to the most turbo busted spec of Season 1, which is Augmentation, let's talk about Devastation Evoker, likely the forgotten child. I honestly have mixed opinions on Devastation Evoker leading to Season 2 so far. I think the tier set, once again, is one of those sets where it's not really bad, but it's not like wow. Kind of like a mixed opinions about it. Only time is gonna show how truly good it is. It all depends on the further tuning of the whole spec. Speaking about tuning, no major changes for Devastation Evoker. Extremely disappointed. I was looking to see something nicer added to it. I mean, outside of some Apex talent changes, outside of this, there's just nothing major done for the spec, right? I've tried different builds. I've tried some Flame Shaper, I've tried some Skill Commander. So far, I love the Flame Shaper gameplay better than Skill Commander. For me, it has always been Skill to be clunky compared to Flame Shaper, especially for Mythic Plus. And I guess I just need to wait for more changes to come, guys. I mean, there's nothing major going for the spec so far, and I'm sure because of this, there are going to be some changes coming to them soon enough, hopefully. And we cannot talk about Evokers without mentioning Augmentation. Augmentation is coming to Season 2 with extremely strong 2Ps and 4Ps to be quite weak. Once again, weak 4 pieces usually get tuned up, because if they are not tuned up, you're going to end up playing 2Ps plus 2Ps, which is something that it might happen the first couple weeks of the season, but they're going to definitely nerf the old tier set if it is the case. Rotation on Augmentation Evoker is very similar. I would say for the most part, you can expect to have something, you know, similar to what you were playing before. Duplicate got changed. Now your upheavals, the duplicate upheavals, no longer knocks targets up. Now, what does that mean for the general health of Mythic Plus? It means like you're not gonna RNG knock up mobs anymore, and this way sniping your team's kicks, which I think for the most part is actually quite good. Well, you're gonna have less stops, which means, you know, maybe gotta communicate better and use more external stops to stop the packs from casting. But other than that, largely unchanged, and I still believe to be a very strong contender for both Mythic Plus and the rating. Unless that gets to be changed, I would expect another Augmentation season. Again, we'll see. 5 weeks of tuning, things might change, but if it doesn't, you can expect Aug to be once again played quite a lot during Season 2. Alright, so now let's talk about my favorite spec in this game, Elemental Shaman. First of all, I made a dedicated video about Eli Shaman for like 10 minutes. I'll give you a summary TLDR here. I think the tier set of Eli Shaman is very good. Both for Mythic Plus and Raid, I'm very happy with it. It was bugged for a long time on beta, so on PTR, so we couldn't really test it fully, but for the past couple of days, at least for the most part, has been working well. I think overall, the approach of Elite Shaman here has been to diversify the builds following Season 2, because if you guys have noticed, we've been playing Stormbringer for the past, I think it's been like 5 seasons or 4 seasons, I don't really remember. So this time around, Farseer is actually looking to be slightly stronger, or Fire builds looking to be slightly stronger than Stormbringer, especially after the Stormbringer nerfs, especially on Tempest. They did, however, nerf our Ascendance damage. So they took our burst. Well, we still have burst, but not as good as before. And they gave us more sustained damage. This, I think, at first I thought it would be very bad. But the compensation buffs on sustained damage actually makes a very good approach of how I like the spec to be played. One thing I don't like about Fire Mage is no prior damage, full path, very strong single target. And I'm generally excited to play fire builds on Elite Shaman in the future, because I am sick and tired of Stormbringer. So far, huge thumbs up on Ellie. Looking forward for more testing. First impression of Shadow Priest. Now let's dive deep to how the spec is playing currently. I think Shadow Priest has a disappointing force set design-wise, at least. If you guys have not seen it, every time you cast Tentacle Slam, your next Vampiric Touch is going to be instant, which generates Insanity and also conjures Apparition that deal 200% of the normal damage. Now, on paper, this sounds cool, especially for 8, but in Mythic Plus, it plays very bad. And I'm going to explain why. I think general changes of Shadow Priest so far hasn't really been bad. For the most part, I've been really liking the changes. But here's where I think the tier set has it wrong. So, why do you rotation? You know, regular rotation, whether you play Void Weaver or Archon, doesn't really matter. You have a lot of globals you gotta spend, you know. Don't cap Insanity, send Devourer Plagues, make sure to have Surge of Insanity, for example, always no more than 1 or 2 stacks, you know, Mind Flays, for example, send the Mind Blast on cooldowns, and Void Torrent, and Halo. And if you play, for example, Invoke Nightmare and non-misery builds, you gotta manually apply Shadow Pain, and all of this juggling, ending up having to cast also manual Vampiric Touch, even though it's instant, to proc your tier set. So it adds one extra button to the already difficult rotation to maintain outside of Misery. If you do play Misery, rotation becomes very streamlined, quite easy, and for the most part, is, you know, acceptable. One major change here for the Void Volley, every time you cast Void Form, which by the way now it should be a lot better as a cooldown, you have a 3 or 5 charges of Void Volley. Instead, previously it was on cooldown. Now it has no cooldown, but it has charges, which creates nice frontal burst. If they change the Misery build differently and allow us to play Misery only for Mythic Plus without having to play Invoke Nightmare, I think Shadow Priest will be in a lot better state, in my opinion, when it comes down to quality of life. Overall, I still think the difficulty of the spec doesn't warrant the output and the fun you can get from it. I personally have been always a fan of Shadow Priest. I've played it multiple seasons. I've always tried to find it fun, but I think they invoked Nightmare. It's the least fun build that you can have on Shadow Priest, at least when you combine that with the already active button coming from your tier set. TLDR, high effort, low reward. Is it worth to ult so far or main? For me, no. You make your own decision. At least visually, Shadow Priest is extremely pleasant. Overall, every other change on Shadow Priest, I've been a fan. And last but not least, let's talk about Warlocks. Warlocks, you're gonna be surprised actually with the amount of changes done to them. I was expecting more, but that's what we have. Let's talk about it. First, starting with the obvious, my favorite spec of Warlocks, Affliction. Affliction has arguably one of the strongest 4-piece tier sets across every single spec in this game. And for the people that do not know what the 4-piece is doing on Affliction, I'm gonna read it right now to you. Pay attention. Each active and stable Affliction increases your damage done by 2% and stacks up 3 times. So that means 6% overall more damage whether you have the unstable Affliction. And now you're thinking, wait a second, how am I gonna apply unstable Affliction for AoE? I never cast that. I only cast Seed of Corruption. And here's where you got it wrong. Now, Seed of Corruption applies Unstable Affliction at 50% effectiveness on your target. So that means you can focus one target, let's say a mini boss. You cast several Seed of Corruptions on that mini boss. You get triple unstable affliction on that mini boss, stacking up, which gives you overall 6% more damage, more prio, and more funnel. This tier set is likely the only reason why I believe Affliction has risen in my eyes from fun POV and also from power. The rotation itself is exactly the same as last season. Manual application of agonies, seeds on cooldown, cast Hound, make sure to Dark Hyros on cooldown, and don't overcap on shards. That's pretty much it, okay? But the 4-piece is what makes the gameplay a lot better, and it's so OP to the point where you actually cast Seed of Corruption on single target, which I'm pretty sure they are going to change in a couple weeks from now. Sustained damage so far of Affliction, very strong. Burst-wise, looking to be also solid. ST is looking to be also solid. Overall, Affliction currently is a good performer. But here is what I said to you last season, and I turned out to be right. No matter how good Warlock spec is, if it is not the most damage across all specs, Warlock will never be picked up to be meta. And the only reason why that is because that they do not have a party buff that gives damage to the party. Yes, Hailstones are here. They give safety, sure. Curses are there too, but neither of this gives more damage to the party. We can argue here all day if you like to, but a single buff like Sky Fury Shaman buff, for example, is 5 times more valuable than your entire toolkit combined. Okay? And I'm saying this with the utmost respect. Mage buff, for example, Devourer DH buff is strong, Monk buff, Warrior buff, all of those buffs are very strong compared to what you have to offer as a Warlock. Overall, Affliction so far has a massive W, likely one of the specs that I'll maintain as ult if nothing gets changed. When it comes to the rest of the two specs, Demonology has pretty boring tier set passive, but I think if it does get buffed the right amount, it might become pretty good. But overall, nothing changes with your gameplay from your tier set. It's all passive. There's been no changes on the Demonology Warlock. It plays exactly the same. Rotation is the same talents, everything the same. So far, first impression, no opinion. Demolock is solid, just not great. I mean, nothing has changed, It's still gonna do decent damage. Nice flat out damage profile. Good ST as well. Last but not least, Demonology. I think the tier set, it's too early to judge whether it's good or bad. So far, no opinions. It would all depend on a future tuning of the spec and in general your Apex talents. So far, yeah, as I already said, I will hold my opinion on this tier set. The Hell Color nerfs early into PTR made us play Diabolist, but after the buffs yesterday to Hell Color, I switched back to it and I actually did way better. Now, Hell Color likes to play heavily into Rain of Fire. It plays similar to Season 1 when it comes down to that build if you have played Destro in S1. My only complaint on Destro is the undertunment of single target. Sure, sustain and burst AoE looks to be good, but the ST so far, I don't know, man. I don't want to talk about performance, but something has to be done. The playstyle itself is not bad. Maybe it's a numbers game. If it does get better numerically, I'll like it. So far, I'd rather play Affli. Alright guys, that's everything so far. It's been a great 2 weeks of testing. Once again, winners and losers video should be out in a couple of days. If you haven't seen the midi version of this video, check it out. It came out 2 days ago. It gives you a perspective similar to this one, where we talk about overall changes with all the specs, the tier set, stuff like that, rotation, flow, fun, etc. We don't talk about power yet. We don't care about power. Power is gonna come into consideration when we start a tier list. And to the question, when we start a tier list, I'll answer only one thing. Soon. Very soon. Be prepared. Thank you for watching, and make sure to follow for more. See you guys next time. Bye for now.